Today, I want to talk about why does time seem to be speeding up? Now, I was having one of those conversations recently that I seem to be having more and more often. And somebody said to me, "Can you believe we're already this far through the year?" And I knew exactly what they meant because I can remember New Year's Eve, I can remember January, and yet somehow we're now heading towards the final few months of 2026. And I find myself asking the same question I hear from people all the time now. Where is time going? And I don't mean that sort of in a casual way when we say it. I really started thinking about it because something very strange happens to time as we get older. Now, when I was a child, and I'm sure you'll feel the same, a year felt enormous. The summer holidays seemed to go on forever. Do you remember that feeling? You'd finish school and there was this vast expanse of summer stretching out in front of you. 6 weeks felt like a total eternity. There was time to go out, come home, go out again, get bored, find something to do, get bored again, and then Christmas. Christmas took approximately 9 years to arrive as a child. It was, oh my goodness, how many weeks, how many days? I know my children used to say that, waiting for Christmas. You'd start thinking about it in November, and somehow December seemed to contain about 400 days. And I'm sure your children or your grandchildren feel that way. Whereas now, I feel as though I take the Christmas decorations down, make a cup of tea, turn round, and somebody is putting mince pies back on the shelves in the supermarkets. So I started wondering about this. Time is genuinely moving faster. Is that actually the truth? And does time genuinely seem to move faster as we get older? And if it does, why? Now I'm getting myself curious because, of course, the obvious answer is that it doesn't. A minute is still a minute, an hour is still an hour. The clocks haven't suddenly decided to speed up because Margaret is getting older. But that question isn't quite good enough because although clock time may remain consistent, our experience of time absolutely doesn't. And once I started looking into this, I discovered something fascinating. We don't actually experience time in anything like the neat order way our clocks suggest we do. Think about 5 minutes. 5 minutes waiting for someone that's late can feel surprisingly long. 5 minutes when you're desperate for the toilet can feel considerably longer, and 5 minutes before you're about to do something you're nervous about can feel endless. But 5 minutes with someone you love, particularly when you know they're about to leave, can disappear almost before you've registered it. Same 5 minutes. What do you think about that? I mean, when you stop and think about it, like I've been stopping and thinking about it, it starts to make sense that it's how we relate to time, it's how we perceive time, because they're all completely different experiences. And that tells us something rather important. We don't simply measure time, we create an experience of it. Our brains do something with time. Mine certainly must do. Our emotions do something with it. Our memories do something with it. And our attention does something with it. So I think that's where this gets really interesting again, because perhaps when we say time is speeding up, we're actually describing something very real. Just not necessarily what we think we're describing, if you know what I mean. Let me explain anyway. Think about a holiday you've taken somewhere completely new. Perhaps you've gone abroad. You've arrived somewhere that you've never been before. Now think about those first few days. You remember the hotel room. You remember where you had breakfast. At least I hope you will, unless you've had too much to drink the night before. You remember walking down a street, trying to work out where you were going. Perhaps you get lost. Perhaps you found a wonderful little restaurant completely by accident. Perhaps you had a terrible meal somewhere and laughed about it afterwards. Maybe you remember the smell of the place, the heat when you walked outside, the view from the window. There's so much information there, isn't there? Now I want you to compare that with 4 ordinary days at home, 3 months ago. Let's say, I don't know, a Monday to a Thursday. Can you remember them? Probably not. You were there, you lived every second of them, you got up, you ate, you spoke to people, you probably worked, you went somewhere, you came home, and those days happened. And they contained exactly the same number of hours as 4 days on your holiday. But when you look backwards, one period can feel huge and richly populated while the other has almost vanished. And that's what fascinates me. Because our sense of how much time has passed is tied very closely, I'm thinking, to memory. When you're experiencing something new, the brain has to work, doesn't it? In order to do that, it's experience, it's got to pay attention, it's got to notice stuff. It creates memories because this information might matter. When everything is familiar, the brain becomes incredibly efficient. It already knows the route home and how many people can be actually driving home at night after work. And you get in the car and it might be, your usual 40-minute drive or whatever it is. And all of a sudden you're there, you're home. It knows what your kitchen looks like, of course. It knows how to make your cup of tea. It doesn't need to create a vivid new memory every time you open the same cupboard and take out the same mug. And thank goodness it doesn't. Imagine remembering every time you've ever unloaded the dishwasher with the same vividness as your wedding day. We'd go mad, wouldn't we? So our brain filters out stuff. It sort of compresses it, makes it smaller. It decides what deserves attention, and that may explain something about childhood. Now, I watch my grandchildren, and they can literally be going out. We'll be going for a walk, and they'll be looking at the butterflies, and perhaps one will just, land on their hand or their arm or whatever, and they can sit on the grass and just observe that butterfly so gently for ages. Or we'll go into the woods and we might see something, like climbing a tree and there's beautiful shapes of the bark, or they'll pick something up and they'll be climbing a tree, and it just goes, time seems to be so slow because they're just focusing on something. Because when you're a child, almost everything's new. Think about how extraordinary the world must be to a 3-year-old. A train isn't ordinary. Snow isn't ordinary. Going to the seaside isn't ordinary. And like I say, a butterfly landing on something isn't ordinary at all. Even going on an escalator can be an event. Children stop and look at things we don't even see anymore. And if you've ever walked anywhere with a very young child, you know what I mean. They're stopping and starting. You're trying to get from one end of the street to the other, and they're investigating a leaf that's just blown in front of their foot. Then there's a stone, then there's something on the pavement, then a dog appears, and then they want to know why the moon is visible during the day. Now that one, if you know how to explain that, then you tell me. And you're thinking, come on, we're going to be late. But actually, who is experiencing more of that walk? Is it you or is it them? And I think that's an interesting question. I like my questions because you've travelled 500 metres and they've travelled through an entire universe of bits and bobs that they picked up, stopped, focused on, experienced. And perhaps that's partly why childhood feels so enormous when we look back at it. It was dense. There were firsts of everything. The first day at school, the first best friend, the first time sleeping away from home, that's a big one. The first time travelling without your parents, yes, another big one. Their first kiss, their first heartbreak, first job. Everything creates a marker. Then adulthood arrives and life quite naturally develops routines. But routines obviously are very useful. I don't think I could live without my routines. We need them. But there's something peculiar about routine when it comes to memory. It compresses. Have you ever driven somewhere familiar and arrived without really remembering much of the journey? Well, I certainly can put my hand up on that one. It's slightly unnerving when you think about it. We weren't unconscious. You were driving perfectly safely. You stopped at the lights. You turned where you needed to turn. But your brain knew the route so well that it didn't require the same level of conscious attention. So now let's expand that idea. What happens if we begin doing that with whole parts of our lives? We get up at roughly the same time. We look at the phone, we have breakfast, we feed the cats, if you have them, we do. We work, we make dinner, we watch something, maybe we go to bed, and suddenly it's Friday. Then suddenly it's the end of the month. Where's that gone? Then someone says, only 4 months until Christmas, and that's me gone, and I'm thinking, oh no. And you want to throw something at them. Where did it go? Well, you were there for all of that. And how much of it required you to be fully present? And I think that's a much more interesting question. This is where I think neuroscience, because I love neuroscience, comes into the picture. We sometimes talk about the brain having an internal clock, but there isn't one tiny area sitting inside your head counting seconds for you. Our sense of time seems to emerge from several systems working together. First of all, of course, attention is involved, memory is involved, emotion is involved, and the body's internal state is involved. Dopamine, which most people know because of its connection with motivation and reward, also plays a role in how the brain processes intervals of time. Different parts of the brain become involved depending upon what kind of timing we're talking about. And the important thing for us is this: your brain is constructing your experience of duration, which explains some of the very odd experiences. You know that expression, a watched pot never boils. Well, it doesn't. There's actually something rather clever hiding inside it, I think. But if you're waiting for something and monitoring time, you notice the passage of time. You put the kettle on, you stand there, you wait, you look at it, it's still not boiling, you look at it again. How can it possibly take this long? But put the kettle on and have an interesting conversation with someone, and suddenly it's boiling. Nothing happened to the kettle. Something happened to your attention. And fear can do the opposite. I speak to people who've been involved in accidents, and sometimes they describe time seemingly slowing down. A car begins to skid, and suddenly everything seems to happen in slow motion. And people describe noticing tiny details, the expression on someone's face, a sound, an object moving, their own hands, and afterwards they may genuinely feel that the event lasted much longer than it actually did. And I know that researchers have been fascinated by this. So does the brain genuinely speed up its processing during a frightening event so that the outside world appears slower? The evidence suggests it's more complicated than that, of course. Emotion changes attention. Stress changes what gets encoded into memory, and a frightening event can produce unusually rich memories. And afterwards, because the memory contains so much information, the event can feel as though it must have lasted longer. Again, time and memory become tangled together. And once you realize that, you start seeing it everywhere. There are days that disappear, and there are minutes you remember for the rest of your life. Think about hearing significant news, someone telling you something, and someone tells you something, and the world changes. You may remember where you were standing, what you were wearing, who was there, what the room looked like. A few seconds can become enormous memory. Actually, I remember when Kennedy was shot and, shot and killed, assassinated. And I remember that. I remembered where I was, sitting room. I think it was a Sunday, I'm sure it was. But anyway, we were just about to have dinner when it came on the TV or the radio. And all the family was around, my parents and my sisters. And it was like we were doing all the routines of setting the table and everything else. And then all of a sudden this came on and we just sort of stood, literally, stood still in shock, listening. Couldn't really take that on board. Another one I remember as well is 9/11, watching that on the telly. And I was waiting, client had just left. I was waiting for a client to come in, and I literally had gone in the other room and just turned the TV on just to, collect a bit of news and this, that, and the other, and there it was. So, and I remember that. I remember the room I was in, the house I was in, because obviously I've moved a lot. And, yeah. So we all do that, don't we? I bet when you sort of listening to this, you can remember where you were standing, what you were wearing, who was there, what the room looked like. And a few seconds can become an enormous memory. Meanwhile, entire months of ordinary life can become literally difficult to retrieve. So perhaps a long life and a life that feels long aren't necessarily the same thing. That thought stayed with me because we spend so much time talking about longevity now. How can we live longer? What can we eat? What can we take supplement-wise or whatever? How should we exercise? What does science tell us about aging? And I'm fascinated by all of that, as you know, from these podcasts. But there's another form of longevity that we rarely discuss. How much life are you experiencing inside the years you're given? You could add years to your biological age. Wonderful. But if you spend those years rushing from one thing to the next without really registering them, what happens to the felt experience of that extra time? And this is where I think our modern world has created a fascinating problem because we're obsessed with saving time. Just think about how many things in your life exist because they're supposed to save you time. You can order something without leaving the house. You can speak to somebody on the other side of the world instantly. You can send documents in seconds, can't you? You can have food delivered. You can do your banking without going into a bank. You can get an answer to a question almost immediately. Even compared with 20 or 30 years ago, it's absolutely flipping extraordinary. We've saved ourselves enormous amounts of time. So where is it? Why are we thinking it's speeding up? Where is all this time that we've saved? Why aren't we sitting around saying, I've got absolutely nothing to do because technology has given me all these hours back? We're not. We're actually saying the opposite, aren't we? I haven't got time. I don't know where the day's gone. I'm so busy. And I find that really, really interesting. Because every gap we've created seems to have been filled by something else. And one of the biggest fillers, of course, is sitting in our hands, the phone. Now, I'm not going to do the predictable thing and tell you phones are terrible and we should all throw them into the sea. I love mine. They're extraordinary, but think about what happens to your attention when you use one. You pick it up because you want to check something, perhaps the weather. While you're there, you see a message, you answer it, then something else appears, you look at that, you read something, perhaps you watch something, and then at some point you've had that strange little awakening. What did I actually pick my phone up for? And you've forgotten. 10 minutes have gone, maybe 20. You were conscious for all of that, but your attention was moving incredibly quickly between unrelated pieces of information, and I wonder how much of that gets turned into a meaningful memory. And I wonder whether this is one reason people are reporting such a strong sense of life accelerating. The external world genuinely has accelerated because communication is faster. News is faster, work is faster, responses are expected faster. You can order something at 10 o'clock tonight and be irritated if it's not outside your door on the step tomorrow morning. That's extraordinary when you think about it. We've normalized immediacy. And the trouble with immediacy is that waiting starts to feel uncomfortable. Try standing in a queue without looking at your phone. It's quite revealing. You'll suddenly notice how often the impulse comes. I have clients here who are addicted to their phones. A lot of clients actually come to me because they're addicted to their phones. Just checking something, just fill the space. And yet, those spaces used to be a part of life. Waiting patiently for a bus. Sitting in a doctor's waiting room. Standing patiently in a queue. And remember, we're English, and the English don't mind standing in a queue, and they certainly don't go to the front of the queue. Looking out at a train window. We daydreamed. We watched people. We thought. We were bored. And boredom is interesting because boredom makes time very visible. Ask a child who's been bored for half an hour, how long's it been? They'll tell you approximately 17 years. Perhaps we've become so good at eliminating boredom that we've also eliminated some of the experiences that made time feel spacious. And I think that's really sad. And then something happened in 2020 that gave millions of us a very strange lesson in time. Lockdown. Do you remember how peculiar time became? For many people, individual days felt incredibly long. And then you'd look back and an entire month had disappeared. The normal markers vanished, no journey to work. If you weren't working, I was, but no Friday night out, no weekends away, no holiday, no popping round to see somebody. Days began resembling one another. And people genuinely started forgetting which day of the week it was. It was an extraordinary demonstration of how much we rely upon events and changes to structure the time. When the landmarks disappear, time becomes slippery, and then life restarted, and somehow it seemed to restart even faster. I've heard so many people say that the years since the pandemic have disappeared, and I wonder whether part of that is because our relationship with time was disrupted so dramatically. There is another explanation people often give for why time accelerates with age. When you're 10 years old, 1 year represents a tenth of your life. When you're 50, it's 1/50th. When you're 80, it's 1/80th. So proportionally, a year becomes a smaller and smaller piece of the life you've experienced. I think there's something intuitively appealing about that idea, although it certainly doesn't explain everything science knows about time perception. But it raises something more emotional, because I think time doesn't only change psychologically as we age, its value changes. At 20, you can genuinely feel as though life is endless. There is always next year. There will always be another summer, another Christmas, another opportunity. And then you reach a point in life where you understand something you couldn't possibly understand at 20. There isn't an infinite number of summers. That doesn't have to be depressing, of course. I actually find it rather beautiful because scarcity gives things value. If there were an infinite number of sunsets, perhaps you'd never bother looking at one. If your children remain children forever, perhaps we wouldn't feel that strange ache when we look at an old photograph. Things matter because they change, and this brings me to something I came across while thinking about this episode that really stopped me. There was a last time somebody picked you up as a child. Think about that. If you were fortunate enough to have a parent who carried you, at some point they put you down, and they never picked you up again. Neither of you knew. There was no announcement. Nobody said this is the last time. You simply became too big. There was a last time you played with a childhood friend, a last time you walked out of your school, a last night you slept in a childhood bedroom. There would have been a last conversation with people who are no longer here. And most of the time, we don't realize a last time while it's happening. It becomes important retrospectively. And I think that's incredibly moving. Because somewhere in your life today, there may be something completely ordinary that one day you would almost give anything to experience again. A dog asleep in the corner, your partner shouting something from the other room, your mum ringing at an inconvenient moment, a child asking you the same question for the 15th time, a cup of tea in your own kitchen, just your life. And one day, those ordinary moments become the things that we miss. Which makes me wonder whether the real tragedy isn't that time goes quickly. Perhaps it's often how we only recognize the preciousness of a moment after it's become a memory. And now we come to the really strange bit, because everything we've been talking about so far concerns our perception of time. Psychology, memory, attention, but physics has something rather astonishing to say. Time isn't quite the rigid, universal thing our everyday lives suggest. Einstein changed it. Relativity tells us that measurements of time depend upon motion and gravity. Two clocks can genuinely record different amounts of elapsed time depending upon the conditions they're experiencing. This sounds like science fiction until you realize that modern technology has to account for it. The clocks in GPS satellites do not tick at precisely the same rate as clocks on Earth because of the effects of their motion and the weaker gravity at their altitude. The systems have to compensate for relativity, or GPS positioning would become inaccurate. I love this, because you and I spend our times ruled by clocks as though time were the most solid, obvious thing in existence, and then physics comes along and says, well, actually, it's a little stranger than that. Now, relativity doesn't mean that your Wednesday afternoon is physically speeding up because you're busy. But I think it's worth allowing ourselves to sit with a bigger idea. Time isn't as simple as it looks. And spiritual traditions have been saying something interesting about our relationship with time for thousands of years. They keep bringing us back to the present moment, the now. It's become such a cliche that we almost don't hear it anymore. Live in the moment. Be present. I say this loads on my podcast. You've never experienced yesterday. You've experienced memories of yesterday. And whenever you remember yesterday, you're actually remembering it now. You've never experienced tomorrow either. You've imagined it, planned it, worried about it, looked forward to it. But every one of those thoughts occurred now. Your entire life is experienced as a succession of present moments, even when your mind is somewhere else. And this is where meditation becomes fascinating. People who meditate often report changes in their sense of time. Sometimes a meditation feels as though it lasted for 5 minutes and 40 minutes have passed. Other times a few minutes can feel enormous, and researchers have genuinely studied the relationship between mindfulness, attention, and subjective time. There isn't a simple equation where meditation makes a minute feel exactly 30% longer. Human beings aren't that tidy. But there is evidence that mindfulness and meditation can alter our relationship with time, and in some studies reduce the feeling of time pressure. And I think everyone who has experienced genuine absorption knows something about this. You don't even have to meditate. Think about something you love doing so much that you completely disappear into it. Painting. I paint. And yes, I mean, I can be in the dining room where I paint, and the next minute it's the afternoon. Gardening. Loads of my friends do gardening, and they just say, they can be in the garden all day, and it just seems the most untimed time. Playing music, walking, cooking, making something, talking to somebody. You suddenly look at the clock and 2 hours have gone, but strangely, those 2 hours don't always feel lost. They can feel full. And that's the paradox again. Clock time vanished, experienced life becomes richer. And perhaps that's what we're really searching for. Not more hours, but more life inside the hours. Now, because this is our podcast and we do like to wander slightly beyond the conventional boundaries from time to time, I want to talk about something you may have encountered in spiritual circles. The idea that time itself is speeding up because the vibration or frequency of the earth is changing. People often bring the Schumann resonance into this. The Schumann resonances are real. They're actually naturally occurring electromagnetic resonance in the space between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere, with a fundamental frequency of around 7.83 Hertz. So it's sort of known as the heartbeat of Mother Earth. Where things become muddled is when you'll see somebody outline saying that the Schumann resonance has risen dramatically and therefore time itself is literally moving faster. But we don't have any scientific evidence for that. But personally, I don't think we need to pretend that we do, because there's a much more interesting conversation to have. What if people who say everything feels faster are genuinely sensing an acceleration, but interpreting its source differently? Look at the world we've created, the volume of information that we encounter, the speed of communication, the pressure to respond, the constant movement of attention. Our nervous systems are living in an environment that is bombarded with that would be completely unrecognizable to somebody only a few generations ago. So perhaps what some people describe spiritually as an energetic acceleration overlaps, at least experimentally, with something psychological and neuroscience can also recognize. Life feels faster, and that experience matters. But then spirituality asks a different question, doesn't it? If the world around us continues getting faster, do we have to? I love that question, because perhaps the answer isn't trying to slow the world down. Good luck to that. Perhaps we learn to create moments in which we stop accelerating. And there is something wonderfully rebellious about that now. Sitting with a cup of tea and doing absolutely nothing has almost become an act of defiance. Going for a walk without taking anything to listen to, eating without looking at the screen, having a conversation without the phone on the table, watching the sky, and that's really important at the moment, looking at somebody when they're talking. We call these small things, but perhaps they aren't. Perhaps they're things that make time visible again, and novelty matters too. If memory helps create our retrospective sense of time, then one way of making a year feel richer is to give the brain something to remember. You don't need to travel around the world, take a different route home, go somewhere locally that you've never visited. Learn something, talk to somebody, do something you've never done before. The point isn't to cram even more activity into life. That would be rather defeating the object, wouldn't it? The point is to wake up the part of you that says, oh, I've never seen this place before. Perhaps that's why travel can feel so expansive. You can be away for 4 days and come home feeling as though you've been away for weeks. Your brain has been awake. And there's another way to do this, which I think is even more powerful. Make the familiar unfamiliar. Tomorrow morning, look properly at the room you woke up in, not through the eyes of someone who has seen it 1,000 times, and pretend you've never been there. Look at the light, listen to the sounds. And when you make a drink, smell it, feel the warmth of the cup. And if somebody you love is sitting opposite you, actually look at their face. Because one of the strange things about love is that familiarity can make us stop seeing the very person who matters the most. We know their faces so well that we barely study them anymore. Look, one day you'll want to remember every line. And perhaps that's the spiritual lesson hiding inside all of this. Presence doesn't stop time. Presence allows us to meet it. So before we finish today, I want to do something with you, because I don't want this episode simply to leave you thinking, goodness, yes, time goes by quickly. I want us to experience the opposite. For just a few minutes, we're going to see whether you can make a moment feel spacious again. If you're driving, obviously keep driving, don't close your eyes, come back and do this later. But if you're somewhere that you can be still, make yourself comfortable. You don't need to sit perfectly. You don't need to meditate perfectly. There's absolutely nothing to achieve here. Just allow yourself to stop. Close your eyes if you want to, and take a breath. Not a huge theatrical breath, just a slightly slower one, and then let it go. And then another, and let that go too. Now, before you do anything else, listen. What can you hear? Perhaps there's something close to you, like a clock ticking or a hum, movement in the house, traffic, a bird, your own breathing. Don't go searching for sounds. Let them come to you. And now see if you can hear something further away. Something you hadn't noticed before. And already you've entered the moment slightly more deeply. Nothing outside you has changed. You changed where your attention was. Now notice where your body's touching whatever it's supporting you. The chair, the bed, the floor. Notice the weight of yourself. You've been carrying this body around all day, and perhaps you haven't actually felt it for hours. Feel your hands. You don't need to move them. Just notice that they're there. Feel the air on your skin. And notice one breath from beginning to end. The breath comes in. and there's a tiny turning point, and it leaves. That breath has never happened before, and it will never happen again. And there will be another breath, but not that one, another. And I want you to notice how much exists inside what we casually call a moment. Sound, sensation, breath, thought, feeling, the temperature around you, life. The moment was always this full. We were simply somewhere else. Now I want you to bring to mind one completely ordinary thing in your life that you love, not the big achievements, not an exotic holiday, just something ordinary. Perhaps it's somebody's voice from another room. Perhaps it's the way your dog greets you or your cat bops its head on you. Or it could be a favourite chair. It could be your morning cup of tea. Someone you can telephone. A view from your window. Anything. A feeling of getting into your own bed. That's so lovely, isn't it? Whatever comes, picture it. And for a moment, imagine that you are remembering it from many years in the future. You're looking backwards, and you would love just once to experience it again. Now really allow yourself to feel that. And then come back. Because here's the wonderful thing. For now, you don't have to remember it. You're still here. It's still part of your life. Quietly say to yourself, I'm still here for this. I'm still here for this. And just stay with that for a moment. No rushing. Take another breath. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Look at the first thing in front of you. Really look at it. And perhaps today, when this podcast finishes, don't immediately reach for the next thing. Just give yourself 60 seconds, that's all, a whole minute, and see how big you can make it. Because I don't think we're going to solve the mystery of time. Physicists haven't managed to do it yet, so I think you and I can give ourselves the afternoon off, but perhaps we can change our relationship with it. Perhaps when we hear ourselves saying, "Where has this year gone?" we can use it as a little alarm bell. Not an alarm that frightens us, obviously, just one that wakes us up to look around. You're here. This is the year you're talking about. It's actually happening now, and somewhere in this completely ordinary day is something that the future version of you would give anything to experience once more. So notice it while it belongs to you. Maybe time isn't asking us to hold on to it. Maybe it's asking us to be there while it passes. And the next time you find yourself wondering, where's the time going? Try asking yourself another question. Where am I while it's going? So I'll leave you with that. Until next time, take your time. Before I go, if you'd like me to look at your numbers, I do offer personal numerology readings. To do a proper reading, I need your full date of birth, your exact time of birth, and the place you were born. Those 3 pieces of information allow me to build a much more complete picture, combining numerology and to create a reading that's unique to you. People often come to me when they're at a crossroads, when life feels as though it's changing, or when they simply want to understand themselves on a deeper level. It's amazing how much can be revealed. Your reading is recorded personally by me as a private audio message, so you can listen to it whenever you like and revisit it as often as you need. If that feels like something you're being drawn towards, you'll find all the details in the show notes. I'd love to read your numbers. So until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.